and welcome everyone. My name is Tina Walia, and I'm delighted to be your host this evening. As part of our ongoing health and wellness series, we are pleased to present tonight's webinar titled Stroke and Dementia. Our distinguished speaker, Dr. Raed Joundi, will share valuable insights on stroke and dementia and discuss how these conditions impact our health and well-being. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available to those who have registered. The Ripple Effect Wellness Organization, or TRIVO, was founded by Dr. Sudhi Devanesan and Mr. Ravi Juneja in 2009. TRIVO's mission is to create healthy communities through education. One of our main goals is to inspire change at a personal level. Think of it as a ripple effect, a drop of information that challenges the status quo and spreads in ever-widening circles to make a positive influence and generate significant results. The Webinar Outreach Wing, or WOW, is a branch of TRIVO proudly serving our community for over 6 years. Throughout the year, we host a variety of webinars featuring leading medical experts with the goal of educating, empowering, and inspiring our audience. Our webinars attract attendees from all around the world, including Asia, Europe, Australia, and North America. With every webinar we conduct, we continue to connect with new individuals from diverse backgrounds and further expand our outreach and impact. Dr. Sudhi Devanesan is a highly respected family medicine physician, educator, and public health advocate. In 2001, Dr. Devanesan was inducted as a member of the Order of Canada in recognition of his significant contributions to health promotion and the prevention of heart disease among South Asians. He has also served as the Department of Family and Community Medicine at St. Michael's Hospital. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Sudhi Devanesan, the president of TRIVO.
Thank you very much, Tina, for that introduction, and welcome everybody to this another wonderful webinar hosted by the WOW team and the Ripple Effect. I'm indeed very proud of what we've done and what we've accomplished in the last year. Many of our programs have become a reality. Impact, for example, working with grade 9 and 10 youth in schools and high schools has been launched and is now moving forward, an extremely popular program. Again, our HealthLit, our young professional group, is working very hard using social media. And our youth group is planning an outdoor event in July. They already had one event in February. It'll be their second event. And Levos, we have a few challenges, but Levos is an app that we are developing along with an AI team to help doctors and nurses with new patients. So today I want to introduce a word, and it's a Japanese word. And the word is ganbaru. G-A-N-B-A-R-U. The word is to persist or persevere, to push through, to complete. It's a word of encouragement for sustained effort. It does not quit. When the going goes hard, the challenges are difficult, the harder you work. And this reminds me of our group here with the Ripple Effect. All our volunteers. It's amazing, our ambassadors, the amount of time and effort and energy they put in. So remember the word Ganbaru. And just a reminder that our annual gala is coming up on September 26th, the Imagination Ball. And if you go to our website, there are more details there for the entire event. So thank you very much, and back to you, Tina.
Thank you, Dr. D, for continuing to enrich our vocabulary with another Japanese word, ganbaru. I would like to remind the audience about the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. I would now like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Raed Joundi. Dr. Joundi is a Rhodes Scholar, an award-winning stroke neurologist at Hamilton Health Sciences, McMaster University, and scientist in the Brain Health Research Program at PHRI. His main academic interests are in stroke prevention, covert cerebrovascular disease, and post-stroke cognition, function, and quality of life. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Raed Joundi. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Tina, and thank you, Dr. Devanesan, and everyone else, all of the organizers of this seminar. I'm just going to share my screen, and I hope that's coming up okay for everybody. Looks good? Okay. Well, welcome everybody, and a real pleasure and honor to be here. To the organizers, you're doing really great work promoting health, and to the registrants, thank you for being here in the evening, listening to a talk on health when you could be doing other things. So I appreciate your attendance, and I hope I will speak to a topic that is on everyone's mind at one point or another, and those are the two big threats to our brain health, which are stroke and dementia, how they are connected. And I put up two birds here on the slide because you will see really by addressing many of the risk factors I discuss in this talk, you can take down two birds in one stone, which are stroke and dementia. So I hope to impart some insights on the connection between the two and the shared risk factors as we move towards trying to build better brain health for people. So I'll start by mentioning the term brain health. This does come up a lot, and I think everyone intuitively understands what this means. There are many different definitions, which basically all speak to the idea of keeping our brain healthy so that we can have optimal physical, mental, and social capabilities and continue to have a good quality of life as we age. I included here the definition from the American Stroke Association, which states that optimal brain health is the absence of cognitive loss and dementia, stroke and other brain diseases, and the ability to meet the demands of everyday life. So my focus today will be on how do we prevent stroke and dementia, which are two major threats to brain health. A third component, very importantly for brain health, is depression, which is a very important topic, and I think one that I would leave for a separate talk and an expert on depression to address. But I want to just put that there because it is an important component as well. So dementia is really a growing global issue. Dementia, I think, as everyone recognizes, is a condition that affects one's cognition, which is memory and other aspects of thinking, and may progress eventually to the inability to live independently and perform activities of daily living. Dementia is becoming more and more common worldwide. This is because the populations worldwide are aging, and dementia is very much correlated with older age. So we will see more and more individuals, unfortunately, develop dementia as people live longer. One very important point is that nearly 2/3 of people living with dementia are in low to middle income countries. So this really needs to be recognized as we look at global strategies of dementia prevention. So it's estimated that 75 million people will be living with dementia worldwide by 2030, which is coming up soon. And the costs in the US are surpassing those of cancer and heart disease. So very important problem. And I wanted to really start with emphasizing the idea that although this is a big challenge, dementia is in fact, in many cases, preceded by a long time, many years, often up to 2 to 3 decades, of undetectable cognitive dysfunction. And that creates opportunities for us to actually shift the trajectory or the pathway towards cognitive decline and dementia through addressing many modifiable risk factors. And if you can imagine, because dementia is more common at older age, if you can just shift dementia forward, backwards, if you can delay the onset, what would happen is that many individuals would actually live the remaining years of their life without developing dementia. And that's very desirable. So delaying the onset of dementia by 1 year would avoid nearly 500,000 people developing dementia over the next 30 years in Canada, and delaying it by 10 years would avoid more than 4 million cases. But dementia is modifiable in many cases. So this is a figure from the Lancet Commission, which looked at risk factors for dementia. And I'm going to go in this in more detail later, but I wanted to start by saying that what they determined was that in 45% of dementia, it could be attributable to modifiable causes. That is to say, if you eliminated all of these risk factors, you could reduce dementia by approximately 1/2. So that tells us that dementia is not inevitable, but in fact, in many cases, modifiable. And this is really a shift from the traditional thinking. And the reason is dementia research started with a real focus on Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease is very much a neurodegenerative condition. It was initially recognized by Alzheimer, who met this patient, a 45-year-old woman with severe dementia, whose husband would come home from working on the railways and find the house in a mess. The food would be rotten. She was making many mistakes, had poor memory, eventually lost her ability to walk and became bedridden and passed away. And her brain was examined and it showed what we now know to be beta amyloid. And that is a protein that may become abnormal or misfolded, and that becomes toxic to the brain and it causes the nerve cells of the brain to die. And that is a gradual and chronic process that results in neurodegeneration of the brain and eventually dementia. So dementia was thought to be primarily due to Alzheimer's disease and not preventable. Our understanding of dementia really shifted with a study called the Nun study. And this was a very powerful and fascinating study where they enrolled 678 nuns as part of a convent. They all had very regimented lives, all had very similar lives where they all ate the same thing, drank the same, they were all school teachers. So the environment was all very similar across all of these individuals and their activities on a daily basis. And these nuns agreed to donate their brains to research after they passed away. So this is one of the, what we'll say, the poster child of the study, Sister Mattia, who was the fifth of 7 children, a retired school teacher. She had taught for 50 years. And when she died, she had agreed to donate her brain like the others in the study. And her brain was full of the Alzheimer's pathology that we had discussed a couple of slides ago. But she had never actually developed dementia in her life. So that's very puzzling because her brain showed signs of Alzheimer's, yet she was not demented during her life. And the question was why? So one of the big differences they found between nuns who actually developed dementia and those who did not during their life were that those who did were far more likely to have a small stroke on their brains when they were examined. And in fact, about 57% only of the nuns who had Alzheimer's pathology in their brains developed dementia in their life. But if they had a stroke, that increased to 93%. So the two really work together to promote cognitive decline in dementia. And 1 to 2 small strokes plus having that Alzheimer's pathology increase the risk of dementia by 20 times. So it really seemed as though having a vascular brain lesion, like a small stroke, lowered that threshold where that Alzheimer's pathology was required to induce dementia. And this has been quite well established now, where in people who have dementia, it's far more likely that their brain shows what we call mixed pathology. And that would be typically a mixture of some vascular changes, such as small strokes, with some neurodegenerative changes, like amyloid. And that's over half of individuals, and it's far more common than just having Alzheimer's disease. And this is still under-recognized. One of the reasons is that there's a real focus on memory problems, and memory problems are more of a feature of Alzheimer's disease on average, and less of a focus on executive function, and that is like performing tasks of daily living, speed of processing, multitasking. These can be more affected in vascular causes of dementia. And there is a bias to diagnose people with Alzheimer's disease. But up to 80% of people with dementia will have some evidence of vascular disease in their brain. And it's thought that the vascular component accounts for about 1/3 of dementias in total. So what does this mean? Well, it means that we have a real opportunity for preventing dementia. And I wanted to mention 2 main pathways of doing that here. The first is through preventing stroke. And by stroke, I mean the acute strokes that occur that manifest with symptoms, such as sudden inability to walk or speak or loss of vision. These are strokes that would typically take someone to a hospital and require treatment. If we can prevent those, that would lead to a reduction in dementia because strokes can lead to dementia. There's also a group of what we call covert cerebrovascular diseases, which mean that there has been something vascular that happened in the brain that is much less detectable. It did not result in sudden weakness or loss of speech, and by and large, the person was not aware that this occurred. Typically, these are small strokes that happen in the brain, what we call covert infarcts. And these can also lead to dementia and also may be preventable through similar pathways. So I'll take a step back and define what I mean when I talk about stroke, just so we're all on the same page. So there's 2 main types of stroke. There's ischemic stroke where there's a blockage of blood vessels in the brain or leading to the brain that causes a lack of oxygen to a certain part of the brain, and that brain ceases to function. There's also hemorrhagic stroke, which is much less common in Canada, about 15%, but far more common in other areas of the world, particularly in certain low and middle income countries, where it can be up to 30 or even 40%. And this is when a blood vessel ruptures and causes a bleed in the brain. Both of these can cause sudden neurological symptoms, one of which can be confusion or cognitive problems or symptoms like dementia. And this can happen through multiple ways. It can happen suddenly if a part of the brain that's important for cognitive function is disrupted. And we call this sometimes strategic infarct or strategic stroke, where there's a stroke in a very important part of the brain necessary for cognitive function. It can happen with multiple strokes that occur over time. But there's also indirect injury to the brain. Strokes can cause neurodegeneration to occur faster, loss of brain volume, inflammation. It can cause leakage of blood vessels and some toxins that aren't supposed to leak into the brain to do so. It can lower the brain's ability to really cope with stresses and other insults. And strokes can also lower one's physical activity, of course, through weakness or fatigue. It can reduce someone's social activity and cause depression, all of which can also lead to cognitive issues in dementia. So I mentioned here at the top, you see that multiple strokes can occur over time, leading to a gradual loss of cognition and ultimately resulting in dementia. On the second figure, a single stroke can cause a sudden loss of cognition. There can be some recovery after a stroke, and most people will recover to some degree, but may not be completely, and may leave somebody prone to further cognitive decline or dementia. And lastly, some individuals have a more gradual cognitive decline, something more similar to a neurodegenerative condition like Alzheimer's disease. So it can occur in different ways. What we established in Canada, and this is specifically looking at Ontario, in over 180,000 people who had a stroke, that the risk of dementia after a stroke was 1.8 times higher if you compare to people without a stroke that have similar risk factors. So that's about an 80% increase in risk. But very importantly, stroke is preventable. And so this is one of the main ways that we can prevent dementia is by preventing stroke. And a landmark study looking at modifiable risk factors for stroke was called the Interstroke Study, led by Dr. Salim Youssef and Dr. Martin O'Donnell out of PHRI, of the Population Health Research Institute at McMaster. And the main findings here were that modifiable risk factors in total accounted for about 90% of the stroke risk. So the vast majority of stroke risk appeared to be modifiable globally. This was a global study, keep in mind. Blood pressure accounted for about 48%. So a massive component of stroke risk was related to blood pressure. Physical activity was next most important. Other really important factors were obesity, smoking, diet, cholesterol, diabetes, and alcohol. So by preventing stroke, we can prevent dementia, and these are some of the main factors that we need to focus on and will really connect to when I talk about what the risk factors for dementia are. But before I move on, this is a brief public service announcement in a way, because we can't prevent all strokes as best as we try. And so it's important to remember that if they do occur, to seek medical attention immediately. And we use an acronym called BFAST. You'll see on the left-hand side, this is from the American Heart Association and Stroke Association. And that stands for sudden loss of balance, sudden vision change, facial drooping, arm or leg weakness, or speech difficulty. All of these should lead one to call 911 or the emergency services immediately, because many of our stroke treatments are very much time dependent. And as much as we can lower the impact of stroke on the brain, that's going to have a proportional effect on lowering the risk of cognitive impairment and dementia. It's also important after a first stroke to prevent a second one, because that increases the dementia risk by another 3 times. And we're doing ongoing work to look at what are the factors that can be modified after a first stroke to prevent cognitive decline and dementia. And this is another global study being done out of PHRI. I don't have results for you today, but we are looking to enroll a real globally reflective population of stroke survivors and look at the reasons why they have cognitive and functional decline over time and why they develop dementia. And this will lead to better treatments for people after a stroke. And this is led by myself, Dr. Sharma, and supported by Dr. Youssef as well. So I've talked about the types of strokes that are clinically more evident, those that cause sudden symptoms like weakness or loss of speech. I haven't yet talked about these covert strokes. And one of the main causes of what we call vascular cognitive impairment, or cognitive impairment or dementia due to vascular causes, is small vessel disease. And these are when the tiny or small vessels of the brain start to block off over time and can cause small strokes. These are not immediately obvious, do not cause immediate or evident symptoms, but can be detectable with more detailed examination or sometimes with cognitive examination as well, and can be seen on an MRI scan, sometimes a CT scan. Remarkably, they're 4 to 5 times more common than the clinically manifest strokes, so the ones that actually cause symptoms. This is somewhat scary because it means that many individuals do have small strokes in their brains, and often I do see patients in the clinic after they've done an MRI for another reason, or they've done an MRI as part of a study, and a small stroke has been visualized, and they say, well, when did this happen? I never had any symptoms. This is very scary to find out. You'll see here that it's very much correlated with age as well. So by the age of 70 to 79, about 12 to 20% of people will have one of these small strokes, and over the age of 80, it's a quarter or more of individuals. Some people call these silent strokes, but they're certainly not silent because they can cause gradual loss of cognitive function over time. They may be quiet, less detectable, but certainly not silent. These strokes can predict more rapid cognitive decline, declines in walking speed, and increase the risk of having a future stroke and double the risk of having dementia. They have similar risk factors to the clinically evident strokes. Another aspect of small vessel disease that I think is worth mentioning, but I can't really dwell on too long with this talk, is what we call white matter disease. This is another disease of the small vessels, sometimes referred to as some kind of wear and tear, simply speaking, of the small vessels. They look like white areas on an MRI scan, and you can see going from mild, moderate to severe. Those white areas in the deep parts of the brain are a lot more obvious. They can be very common at older age, at least to a mild degree, but when they become severe, can start to cause cognitive issues. We don't know as much about these other than they are also related to high blood pressure and other vascular risk factors, and also can lead to cognitive decline. So how does high blood pressure, for example, or other vascular risk factors lead to cognitive impairment or dementia? Well, it's a bit like an iceberg. So at the tip of the iceberg that you can see, they can cause strokes, which can lead to dementia. They can cause these covert strokes that we talked about, which you can see on an MRI scan, but typically don't present with symptoms, as well as white matter disease. But there's some other pathways that are even hidden deeper beneath the surface. That includes effect on the blood vessels, like in the heart, which can impact the brain, in the carotid arteries, which is the largest arteries allowing blood to flow to the brain, and within the brain itself. They can promote or accelerate neurodegeneration, or through other mechanisms we don't fully understand, like inflammation or leakage from blood vessels. So that's how these vascular risk factors can indeed cause loss of brain function, brain volume, neurodegeneration, cognitive impairment, and dementia. So going back to this figure, where I mentioned that 45% of dementia cases may be attributable to modifiable causes, I'd like to highlight the ones that we would consider as vascular risk factors. You see high cholesterol there, physical inactivity, diabetes, smoking, hypertension, obesity, and excessive alcohol, all of which are also very important for stroke prevention. It's also important to mention that the impact of these risk factors can vary around the world. For example, high blood pressure is globally a risk factor for dementia, but in certain areas is a lot more important and may account for up to 20% or higher of the risk of dementia in certain low to middle income countries, most likely because it's far more prevalent, at least untreated hypertension in those areas. There are other risk factors on this figure that are important to highlight, even though they're not strictly considered vascular, but they are potentially modifiable in some cases. For example, hearing loss and depression are risk factors, and so those should be addressed if they arise. Social isolation may promote or progress cognitive impairment. Air pollution, which of course is more of a community level, country level, and global issue rather than an individual level issue, may impact dementia. and visual loss is a new risk factor that was been increasingly recognized in the last few years. So this slide highlights a paper which I think has this viewpoint and fleshes this out quite nicely, which is that stroke and dementia confer risks for each other and share some of the same largely modifiable risk and protective factors. That includes hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol, smoking, obesity. So stroke prevention will decrease the risk of dementia. And that's why our understanding of dementia has evolved so much, such that we really view it as a spectrum where the vast majority of cases are somewhere in the middle, where there's a mixture of different causes, typically vascular causes and neurodegenerative causes. And seeing a case which is at one of the extreme ends, which is only Alzheimer's disease without any trace of any vascular disease, or pure vascular disease with no element of neurodegeneration, is less common. This also means that the risks tend to flock together. So you can see here that at the age of 65, the risk of having a stroke in women is 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 for men. And developing dementia in women is 1 in 5 and 1 in 7 for men. And overall, having either stroke or dementia, the risk in women is 1 in 2. Again, that's after reaching the age of 65. And the risk of men in 1 in 3. The risk in women is typically higher because women tend to live longer and so would be more likely to develop dementia at older age. It may also be the reason why we are seeing some positive trends in reductions in the rate of dementia. This is another study in Canada, and it shows a concurrent decrease from 2002 to 2013 in the rates of stroke as well as the rates of dementia, although the reductions in dementia are more modest. And this is possibly because we are getting better at addressing and controlling vascular risk factors and being more aware about them on a population level due to really the focus on preventing heart disease initially and then stroke. And now we see that there could be also an impact on dementia. So I'm going to go into a few more specifics now on prevention. So first is hypertension, which, as I mentioned, is the most important factor for stroke prevention. It's blood pressure, blood pressure, blood pressure. And also now recognized very important for dementia. So the SPRINT trial was a study looking at a stricter target of blood pressure, systolic blood pressure of under 120. So it's the top number on the blood pressure reading compared to under 140. And they saw that there was a reduction in heart disease and a reduction in stroke, but also saw there was a small reduction in mild cognitive impairment or dementia. So it's very promising to see that blood pressure control can lead to not only reductions in stroke, but also mild cognitive impairment and dementia. Of course, there's a balance, and if blood pressure goes too low, there was a slight increase in impact on the kidney, as well as symptoms of having low blood pressure. And what's happened over the years is a shift towards targeting lower blood pressure. I won't go into all the details of blood pressure management. This is a slide from Hypertension Canada, and it's very important to see your doctor, check your blood pressure, be aware whether you do have high blood pressure, and then institute the appropriate treatment, whether it be initially lifestyle management or subsequently medications. There has been a shift to a lower target for that higher number of under 130, which was controversial because it means a lot of people between 130 and 140 were suddenly considered to have high blood pressure. And it may be reasonable in some cases when blood pressure is initially in the 130s to try to address through lifestyle measures. But if that's not working, medications are very important, can help bring the blood pressure down, and certainly help to prevent heart disease, stroke, and dementia. And this is a very busy slide, but it's to reflect the power of what we call a meta-analysis, when many different studies are put together to try to come to some final answer on whether a intervention is effective. Initially, it was unclear whether there's a relationship between lower blood pressure and dementia, and through multiple meta-analyses, they have found that yes, overall, on average, blood pressure control does lower the long-term risk of dementia, and that does not differ between males or females, between people of different ages, between those who have had a stroke or not in the past. Diabetes is also a very important risk factor. This is results from the Pure Mind study, which is a large global study, again, run out of Population Health Research Institute, and which enrolls individuals, checks their cognitive function through pen and paper test, and an MRI brain is done as well. And this found that diabetes increased the likelihood of these small strokes of the brain by approximately 50%. Both high blood pressure and diabetes are more important in many ways to modify earlier in midlife. The reason for that is because, of course, there's a much longer life ahead in which events like heart disease, stroke, or dementia can occur. And there may also be other reasons. But the fact is, study after study has shown that there's a greater impact by addressing these risk factors earlier on in midlife than later on in life. Unfortunately, many individuals remain unaware that they even have high blood pressure. From the Canadian Health Measure study, they showed that 30% of individuals are unaware they have high blood pressure when they were actually tested for it. 17% of individuals were taking medication but not well controlled. From the Pure study, a very large global epidemiological study of over 200,000 people, they showed that only 46.5% of people were aware of their condition of high blood pressure. This means that there's a lot of work to do. And one study we did in Canada showed that this issue is going to get more and more challenging because more and more people are developing these vascular risk factors. You see that over time, at all age groups, the rate of high blood pressure is going up over the past 20 years. That might be because of better recognition, which is a good thing. But ultimately, we see the people who report having high blood pressure is increasing. Same with diabetes, obesity. But thankfully, the rates of smoking have been going down, although are still present in something like 15 to 20% of individuals, unfortunately. We also note, again, that at younger age, the impact of these vascular risk factors is stronger. Again, this is consistent with many other studies. So for example, for diabetes, if you have diabetes in your 30s, there's 7 times the risk of stroke. In 40s, that would be 4 times. And in 70s, that would still be an elevated risk, but 1.5 times. You can see the same impact with high blood pressure, that the younger you are, the more impact it will have on long-term risk and the more important it will be to modify. That's very important again for dementia, because passing that threshold where cognitive impairment turns into dementia, which is really where functional impairment starts, where difficulty with daily activities starts, and where that impact on quality of life really begins, there may be a long prodrome of very subtle changes that could be modified by addressing these vascular risk factors as early as midlife or even earlier. This is a figure showing what we might call an optimal window for intervention. So that means in middle age, the effect of any intervention is going to be the largest. But of course, very few people at that age will develop the condition of interest. It's really over a much longer follow-up where you see that effect. That's in contrast to older age, where perhaps the effect is less, but far more people at this age are developing the condition. That means even if there's a 1 to 2% change rather than a 10% change, the number of people that are going to be impacted is very large. So both at younger age and at older age, it's extremely important to do what we can to modify dementia risk. I think it's very important to mention the following risk factors, which are sometimes neglected when we talk about vascular risk factors. The first is sleep. And the reason I mention this is because you'll see the relationship between sleep and stroke and sleep and dementia is almost exactly the same. So the figure in the top is showing that the optimal sleep hours, where the risk of dementia appears to be lowest, is between 6 and 8 hours. And if you go much shorter than that or much longer than that, you'll see an increase in that risk of dementia. The figure from the bottom from the interstroke study shows the same, where a short sleep duration and a long sleep duration are associated with higher risk of stroke. Now, that might be related to other factors in life that make it difficult to sleep, or reasons why people are sleeping longer that are hard to control for, but study after study has really shown the important impact of sleep. Physical activity, very important to do physical activity because we see the same kind of curve, whether it's for dementia or stroke. Whereas some physical activity compared to none has quite a large impact on lowering stroke and dementia. Even if it's something like 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours of walking per week, or another activity that is of interest to you, like gardening or doing something around the house that requires moving around. Moving is much better than not moving. And that's why we see these impacts on health very broadly. And it's important to remember that we should be always thinking about trying to stay active, not necessarily being super active or getting to that 10,000 steps per day, but doing something. The flip side of physical activity is what's called sedentary time, which is that the number of hours that someone is sitting down throughout the day. And you can see as those hours go up, the risk of both stroke and dementia go up. And this is all encapsulated within the recent 24-hour movement guidelines in Canada, which I think nicely highlight the importance of physical activity, sleep, and sedentary behavior. And just briefly, because you can go to the website, get more details, they recommend moderate to vigorous aerobic activity. They do say 150 minutes per week, but try not to let the numbers paralyze you. Again, doing whatever you can is better than not moving at all. Sleep, again, between 7 to 8 hours, and trying to limit those long stretches of sedentary time, sitting down, primarily the screen time is important for health. One of the reasons these might be important is preventing obesity, which is a risk factor, as we mentioned, for stroke and cognitive decline. And another study from Pure Mind has shown a relationship between increased adiposity or obesity, a measure of obesity, and worse cognitive function. The coffee drinkers out there might enjoy seeing this. It's a bit of an aside, but reassuring for us to know that there's actually a seemingly positive association between coffee drinking and lower risk of dementia. And what they showed is that seems to have a maximum effect at about 2 drinks of caffeinated coffee per day. There isn't any more benefit to drinking more than that. Again, this may be related to other factors, why people are drinking coffee, the social conditions, and so on. But, well, if you're drinking 1 to 2 cups per day, it seems like it may be beneficial, and there may be some interesting reasons why that might be true, such as antioxidants within coffee. So we're coming near the end of my talk. Some people have put all these things together and said, well, why don't we intervene and change multiple different factors and see if we can improve cognitive function in individuals? One of these was called the finger trial, and this was a large package given to people. It included nutrition, physiotherapy, vascular risk reduction, and even computer-based cognitive training. And what they found was there was a improvement in what we call executive functioning, which is more of that processing speed and performance of tasks that we see in vascular cognitive impairment. So it's interesting, certainly. The complete package is very difficult to implement in everyday life outside of the context of the trial, but it does show that we can possibly change these things with enough effort. And some of the aspects in the package were having lots of fruits and vegetables, fish consumption, limiting sugar intake, limiting alcohol intake, and aerobic exercise. Another study called the Pointer study in the US has validated these findings. I won't go into it, but they showed some similar, somewhat modest improvements, but still significant with a global risk reduction package. What about medications? Well, there's no silver bullet here. Aspirin does not reduce the risk of dementia, and this was in a very large study called the ESPRIT study, where people without a history of heart disease or stroke were given aspirin, and it did not impact the risk of dementia. Aspirin is still important in people with a history of heart disease or stroke. Cholesterol lowering, certainly in the right person with at least a moderate risk, moderate to high risk, or plaques building up in their blood vessels, or a history of heart disease or stroke, will lower a future risk of stroke. And there is evidence that controlling that LDL, which is primarily thought to be that harmful cholesterol at high levels, can lower dementia risk. And it's important to note because there are some somewhat unfounded perceptions about use of statins, which are the primary mode of reducing LDL cholesterol and cognitive decline, and that has not been borne out in the evidence. In fact, we've seen the opposite with a lower dementia risk. So I wanted to step back and emphasize again that even a modest delay in the appearance of cognitive deterioration in life could translate to a very large reduction of dementia. And it's estimated that among the 106 million people who may develop Alzheimer's globally by 2050, about 23 million could be avoided if it was possible to delay the start of that disease by only 2 years. And it's also important to note that this is not just an individual level effort. This is the topic of a completely separate talk, but we really need much broader strategies that address these risk factors. Health policies, community interventions, and other interesting new strategies like a poly pill, which can address multiple risk factors at once, or really improve people's blood pressure control. These may be key strategies to trying to impact as many people as possible, which is really the key. E-health as well, for example, using apps to monitor and track and improve health may be key strategies to try to really take this from an individual level to a population level. Lastly, I wanted to mention that the reason we care about stroke and dementia is because it affects one's function and quality of life. One of the most important drivers of that quality of life is mobility, and something as simple as walking. And with the PURE study, we recently showed that many of these same risk factors, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, even depression, are related to a more rapid loss of walking ability with aging. And so we can actually keep people not only just living longer, but also walking better and for longer and staying more mobile by addressing these risk factors. So even removing ourselves from diseases like stroke and dementia, we see that most likely an individual's function can be improved. And this was recently highlighted on the cover of this journal. So in my summary, I'll say that dementia is not inevitable in many cases. That vascular component accounts for about a third of all dementias and is currently the most potentially preventable and treatable component of dementia. The population impact of vascular risk control is likely higher than any other intervention that we have. And a real focus on stroke prevention, both the symptomatic strokes and the covert strokes, is really also dementia prevention. So some main messages here: please check and manage your blood pressure. If your blood pressure is high, please address it with your physician. See your doctors to monitor this, to track it, and to get on appropriate treatment. Move more. Whatever you're doing, move more. Anything is better than nothing when it comes to physical activity. Of course, don't smoke. A lot of progress made in the last many years, but this still needs to be re-emphasized. Even at older age, stopping smoking can have a real positive effect on brain health. Increase fruits, vegetables, whole grains, fish. Often the Mediterranean diet is recommended. This is often challenging due to cost of food, but we have to do what we can to eat a more balanced and healthy diet and less highly processed foods. Staying socially engaged, getting adequate sleep, and addressing hearing loss and depression as they arise will also help. So just doing our best to address these simple risk factors for brain health. My very last slide before ending, I just wanted to highlight this book, which I'm currently reading. I actually started this morning and I couldn't put it down, and I'm halfway through. So many of the studies I presented today were from PHRI, talking about the risk factors for heart disease and stroke and interventions like blood pressure or the poly pill to lower the risk. These have come from large global collaborations and team efforts that have been led by Dr. Salim Youssef, who's on the board of this organization through PHRI and was the founder of PHRI. And just an absolutely riveting read. So many great stories in this book about how to do science and how much science has evolved in doing large global studies to make an impact globally, and really the power of teamwork and improving health globally. So congratulations to Dr. Youssef on this book, and I just wanted to highlight this as background to much of what I said. So I'll end there, and back to you, Tina. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Joundi, for your insightful and engaging presentation on stroke and dementia. Your expertise, clarity, and compassionate approach helped deepen our understanding of these important and complex conditions. We truly appreciate the time you took to share your knowledge and experiences with us.
Thank
To
you.
the audience members who've inquired this over and over again, this webinar is indeed being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to those who have registered. The recording will also be available on the Ripple Effect Wellness Organization YouTube channel. Now we are on to our most popular section of the webinar, which is the Q&A section. I would now like to invite Dr. Sudhi to moderate the Q&A session with Dr. Joundi. Please submit your questions through the Q&A chat box at the bottom of the screen.
Thank you, Raed, for an excellent presentation, very comprehensive. And I would also like to second your comments on the book, Climbing Mountains, by our good friend, Dr. Salim Youssef. It is not a book purely about science, but also a story of many people who have contributed to the amazing changes that have come about, saving lives in vast populations, changing the way we approach heart attacks, strokes. It's just an amazing book, and I strongly recommend it to anybody who's really interested in a very inspiring story. So we have a few questions. There's one was actually a question about the difference between cognitive decline and dementia. In the early stages of dementia and cognitive decline, is there a specific, or is there a place in which you can make a difference between those two conditions?
Great question. And it is important to clarify that point. So there is an entity called mild cognitive impairment, and that is considered when someone has some objective cognitive impairment. That could be, you know, a real sense that cognition has considerably changed and memory has declined. It could be evidence from a family member that that's the case, or very commonly, it's a performance on some kind of cognitive task that's done in clinic that indicates that mild cognitive impairment may be present. But the key is that in mild cognitive impairment, there's no functional loss. The activities of daily living are preserved. Doing finances, making meals, driving, doing the laundry, mobility, bathing, all of these are preserved. So there's not yet a functional impact. When that functional impact begins to present itself, that's when mild dementia is considered. Now, people with mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, it's estimated that about 10% per year may convert to having a dementia. So it's certainly not inevitable that those with MCI develop dementia. And it may certainly still be within an important window where dementia can be prevented or, as I mentioned, just delayed. Because the fact of the matter is, at the age of 95, the rate of dementia is very high, but it's also such that if you can delay dementia by a year or two, then 1 or 5 or 10, one may live out the remainder of their life dementia-free, and that's what's really desirable here. So ultimately, MCI is important to recognize because it's a window where we may still be able to alter that trajectory. And I'll leave it at that. I hope I answered that question.
Thank you very much. There are quite a few questions that have come in now. Is there a connection between marijuana and dementia?
So, good question. It's far more relevant these days. Marijuana and dementia, the connection is still being studied. We don't have strong evidence that, for example, occasional marijuana use causes dementia, but heavier long-term use may certainly impact on memory, attention, thinking. I think there are very well recognized short-term problems with memory and attention with marijuana use. And heavy use over many years may cause poor cognitive performance. But sometimes it's quite difficult to separate the effect of marijuana from other very closely associated factors like smoking, mental health conditions, alcohol use, other socioeconomic factors. So at this time, I think it does require more study. In Canada, because of relatively more recent legalization, I think these studies are going to come as we have far more individuals who may be using it more regularly, begin to age, and we can study whether or not there is a very convincing link between marijuana and dementia use.
Thank
That would be
you.
my answer now. Yeah.
Is there a genetic link between dementia? And along with that, learning new languages, is that helpful in dementia prevention?
So, good questions. Dementia, there is a genetic link. So, dementias that are purely genetic, which means that they are passed along through generations, tend to occur at a very young age and tend to be very rare. Okay, those purely, and I won't go into the specific conditions, but those are rare. Now, there is some genetic predisposition to dementia, but again, that doesn't mean that one will get dementia. There is one gene, for example, called ApoE4, which increases the risk of having dementia, but by no means is it certain. And in fact, the increase in that risk is not that much more than something like diabetes or having multiple vascular risk factors. So again, not in that realm of inevitability, but yes, There are some genes that may increase that risk of having dementia, but it's by no means guaranteed that that would occur. Often when people say, is dementia genetic? What they're really asking is, well, my mother, for example, got dementia at age 85. Am I going to get dementia? Those sorts of situations where it happens at much older age, it's very unlikely to be any genetic condition, but rather that the condition is actually common at old age.
Thank you. I think you've answered a couple of the other ones already in your talk.
I may have missed your second question there because there were two.
Yes, learning a new language
Oh, yes. Okay,
as
thank you.
one ages, would that be
So
a helpful exercise?
there's something we didn't discuss too much called cognitive reserve. So this is one's ability to withstand different insults to the brain that may reduce cognitive function over time. So a big factor, for example, in cognitive reserve is education. And we know that higher education does delay dementia. Another big factor is physical activity. Those who are multilingual, uh, that does appear to build cognitive reserve and does appear to delay the onset uh, of dementia. Um, Typically, the studies are done in people who have learned languages at a very young age, right? So they already know 2 or 3 languages. I have to say, off the top of my mind, I don't know of studies of people who have learned new languages at an older age. But to me, it's almost guaranteed to have a positive effect. We know that cognitively stimulating activities are very important to preserving brain health. And learning a language is extremely cognitively challenging and difficult. And I would say that would be a great way to stave off cognitive decline and dementia, even without having studies to prove it.
Thank you. I think that's absolutely true. Um, um, we're coming to the end of the questions. I think there are some detailed things about exercise and um, prevention of strokes and dementia. Are there any specific foods, etc.? And I think you've already mentioned that in your talk already. And the last question is there a connection between insulin dependent diabetes and dementia? And I think it's the poorly controlled ones that are the ones that are more prone to dementia, even if you have diabetes. But what is your take on that?
Yeah, no, agreed with what you said. Poor control, and it's quite linear actually, where you see the higher that glucose level taken as the average over the last 3 months, the higher the dementia risk. Um, there is a long-standing recognized risk between diabetes and dementia, and that does include the insulin-dependent diabetes, certainly because the severity there may also be greater. But again, it's that control aspect where controlling the condition and trying to keep it well managed will certainly mitigate that risk. Um, so I think I'll leave it there. Dementia is a very wide topic, and there are very promising new therapies for dementia as well that actually seem to have for diabetes. I apologize. That seem to also have some protective effects on the brain so far, such as medications called GLP-1 agonists. We are still waiting for definitive evidence that they prevent cognitive decline and dementia, but some studies have shown that may be the case. So it's sort of promising new avenues to prevent cognitive decline in diabetes.
Any last question? Is there a difference between e-cigarettes and cigarette smoking um, in terms of health risk?
Well, it's not an area of real expertise of mine, but if you're referring to vaping, I suppose, which or e-cigarettes, it likely does expose people to fewer harmful chemicals than smoking. Likely is less harmful, but we do not know. I mean, we just do not know the long-term effects of the brain of e-cigarettes because of how new it is. And one thing that worries me is, of course, it takes time for us to gather the appropriate data, just like smoking and lung cancer. That connection, unfortunately, took a very long time to establish. So something new like e-smoking, which may have some better properties compared to smoking itself, but may still be harmful, and we have yet to get the data. I do worry in the meanwhile about such activities before we know for sure the long-term effects. Likely there are ill effects. Those who use it as a way to cut down on smoking, that might be a reasonable pathway, but I think chronic use may still lead to some long-term ill effects on the body and the brain. And again, that's yet to be further established.
And there was just one comment that we got saying that find that even some of the most highly intelligent and people active can also develop dementia. So that was a comment that came in. So thank you very, very much, Raed, for answering all those questions and for an excellent presentation. And we'll hand it back to Tina at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Devenson.
Thank you very much, audience, for all your comments and engaging questions. We truly appreciate your participation. Dr. Joundi, thank you so much for your insights, and thank you, Dr. D, for moderating the Q&A. Next, I'm delighted to invite our illustrious leader and chair, Smita Chandra, to say a few words. Over to you, Smita.
Thank you so much, Tina. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us today and for attending the webinar. We hope you found it as interesting and informative as we did. Thank you so much, Dr. Joundi, for educating us about the connection between stroke and dementia, and we will definitely follow your guidelines to build better brain health. And thank you, Dr. D, for teaching us one more new word to expand our vocabularies and for moderating the Q&A session. I would like to thank our team that works very hard to bring you these one-of-a-kind webinars. Tina Walia for hosting the webinar and creating the slideshow. Eshna Roy for designing our beautiful flyers. Dr. D for being our mentor and for helping us distribute our flyers and spreading the word within our community. Dr. Asha for extending our outreach by connecting with many community organizations and libraries. Ashima Jain for running the slideshow seamlessly, and Sridhar Rao for tech and Zoom support, and Sanjeev Chandra for collating the many questions so that we could address all of them. A huge thanks to our ambassadors, Roisin and Paul O'Hara, Jamie Sinton, Dilpreet and Harjeet Bansal, and Taimur Zafar, who have worked hard to promote our flyers in the community, often going out in all kinds of bad weather to distribute our flyers and make sure that they reach everybody. Thank you also to the HealthLit team for promoting our webinars on social media, and please do follow us on our social media platforms to stay in touch with our events. If you too would like to support us, please donate to our outreach through our website at www.trevo.org. We are very pleased to inform you about our upcoming webinar on longevity and aging gracefully with the ever-popular speaker, Dr. Peter Lim. This webinar is not to be missed. We all want to live longer and we all want to live younger. So we hope to see you at our next webinar on October 7th. Please watch out for the flyer and do register for the session. Thank you all for supporting, attending, and promoting our webinars. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. I'm now going to hand it back to you, Tina.
Thank you so much, Smita. On behalf of the Webinar Outreach Wing of the Ripple Effect Wellness Organization, I would like to thank you all for attending the webinar tonight. We will see you back on October 7th at our next webinar. We wish you a safe, healthy, and an enjoyable summer ahead. Until then, see you later.